Good evening and welcome to Views with Joyce Waddell. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. We're going to be talking with Nettie Thomas Lord this evening. She's an author, she's a community activist, she's an educator. She has a wide variety of experiences in working with young people, writing, and on the literary scene. We're going to be talking tonight about publishing and how it's so important that we put our ideas down, that we publish these ideas, and that we make them readily available for others to read so that we can tell our story. Because if we don't tell our story, someone else will tell it for us. So we're going to be talking with Nettie Thomas Lord as she shares her experiences, and they're very wide, as she talks about how an idea can come to you, how that idea can make a difference, and how that idea can be the most important idea that someone has ever thought of. Welcome, Nettie.
Hi, Dr. Waddell. How are you?
Wonderful. Nettie, you have a wide variety of experiences as an educator. You were a school principal.
Yes.
And in one of the toughest schools in New York City, and people think you weren't going to survive, didn't they?
They probably thought that, yes.
But you proved them that you did survive and that you made a difference in the lives of those children and that they did learn to read and that reading was important to them.
That's right.
And that led you to writing your book, right?
Well, part of the way, but that was another journey prior to that. Could I speak on that journey?
Absolutely.
Well, I was a teacher in the elementary schools first in New York. And from that point, I went into a district office facility where I was director of staff development. And in that position, what I did was I had to order books, do staff development with teachers on literacy and social studies, those type of things, how to differentiate instruction. And in that job, I was able to meet with authors of books. I met with all kinds of distributors and publishers, and I had been thinking of writing a book for a long time, but I never did. But I saw the way that books were put together and how they were done, and so I said, one day I'm going to write a book. Well, when my son married a young lady, and they had a son, and when he was 2.5 years old, he had a lot of questions about the baby.
Now, could he read at 2.5 years old at that point?
He could read some words because he was already in a preschool.
At 2 years old, he was able to read.
He was reading some things.
Yeah, he could recognize.
Everything.
He could recognize
yes.
words. He was able to decode. He was able to do sight reading.
Yeah, and picture reading. Picture reading.
Right.
But she looked in the library all around, trying to find a book to tell him about the baby that was coming.
An African American baby.
Well, she's African. She's from South Africa originally. Now, I'll get back to the story about the book. I'm going to tell you a little bit about her and her mom and her background. Her name is Yolanda Sanguini, and her mother was from Nelson Mandela's people called the Xhosa people. They were from the Eastern Cape in South Africa, and that's Nelson Mandela's people. Her father married a Zulu.
From the Zulu tribe.
From the Zulu people, yes.
Which is a very different tribe in Africa, and it's a very unique tribe in Africa.
They're South African, but as her mother explained to me, the languages are very close. So she could actually understand, they could understand each other.
Well, sometimes it's not a complete language, it's more dialect, isn't it?
Yeah.
Rather than a written language with subject, verb, predicate.
Well, they do have a written language. They do have a written language.
Is it as sophisticated as the English language with that many variations?
Yeah, they have about 11 different languages in South Africa. And when you look at their television, they actually play them in different languages while the television set is on. You know, you can see it. Now, what happened was when my daughter-in-law, Yolanda Sanguini, was 9 years old, her mother was arrested for her work against the apartheid system. That was the system that kept black people, indigenous black Africans, on the lowest realm that they could ever live on.
The same thing as Nelson Mandela. That's why he was against apartheid, and that's why he was in prison for more than 20 years.
Yeah. Well, she was imprisoned for 5 months. In 1986, when Oprah Winfrey had women who had been tortured on her show, Yolanda's mother was the woman who represented South Africa. What happened when she was arrested the first time and she was tortured for 5 months, the Amnesty International, along with the African National Congress, got her out of South Africa.
Now, Amnesty International, that's white people, isn't it?
Yes, basically white.
So white people were very sympathetic to apartheid and what was going on at that time, so they joined with that
African National Congress, yeah.
African National Congress to
get her out of South Africa. So she was in exile in New York City.
And she had to take on a different identity and everything?
No, she kept her name, but she was in exile over here in the United States.
So that they could not find her and arrest her again?
Well, they couldn't arrest her in the
she was a political
States.
she was a political refugee then?
Yes, she was.
Okay.
And that's why she was on an Oprah show. And she had also been, as I said, tortured as well. She was a torture victim. She had 2 children, Yolanda and Lee. Lee was older than Yolanda.
Your daughter's mother-in-law is who you're speaking of now?
Yes, I'm talking about my daughter's mother-in-law.
Yeah, I just want
mother, not mother-in-law, but
the daughter's mother.
Mother.
So that the audience can follow your story.
Yeah, her name is Nomi. I can just tell you, her name is Nomi Sanguini. So Nomi came here with her daughter Yolanda and son Lee. When Lee was 11, Yolanda was 9. And she remained in the United States for over 22 years. She actually got a degree from New York University, a master's while she was here so long.
Could she not go back, or was she?
She was not allowed to go. If she had gone back before apartheid ended, she would have been rearrested and put in prison again.
Audience, we'll continue to talk with our guest tonight, Nettie Thomas Lork, as she talks about her writings. She's going to share with us some background about her writings, the books that she's written, about her literary career, and about her career as a teacher, a principal, and some of the most difficult situations. And yet she was successful in the things that she did. And she's going to also share with us some of the reasons behind what she was thinking when she wrote her book, and how that book is such a powerful book today. And anyone that picks it up and reads it, they just can't put it down, because the information in it is something that we all want to know about. And it's very interesting to us. And so she given us a background of why she wrote it. And so she was put in exile here in the United States as a political refugee, your daughter's mother.
Yes, daughter-in-law's mother.
Your son's mother-in-law.
Wife, yeah.
Okay.
Well, when Nelson Mandela was freed, she was able to go back after about a year later, and she helped to get him elected to the presidency. Yolanda had already grown. She went to school in the United States. She became an English major. She went to Howard, she went to Temple, but she finished her degree at the University of South Africa in Johannesburg, where black students were not allowed to go prior to that.
Now, they had 3 different races there, didn't they?
They actually have the Afrikaan, which is the Dutch. They have the colored. Then they have the other groups like the Chinese and the Indians, the Asian people, and then on the outer circle you have the indigenous black people.
So you have various races.
Yeah.
And they don't mix with each other.
They didn't at the time. They were given certain privileges based upon the skin color. They were given certain privileges based upon the skin color. Yeah. So Nomi was of the indigenous black.
She was in the outer circle.
She was in the outer circle.
In other words, she was a native African.
Yes.
Of South Africa.
Yes.
Of the dark-skinned people.
Yeah.
Well, if she was a native African, how was she able to be given political asylum here in the United States? Seemed like that was the group that was most discriminated against?
Because Amity, after she was put
They saw
in
something
prison,
in her?
The African National Congress was the political arm of the black people in South Africa. They had a political arm in the United States as well.
Do they still have it?
Yes.
A political arm?
Yes, but when I say that, I mean they were working to get freedom for African people in the United States, as well as in
Well, they
South
were already
Africa.
free, so why were they working to get freedom for them?
Apartheid meant that they were not free.
In Africa, but they were already free over here.
They were free over here.
Well, why did they want to go back and not embrace the freedom that
Because it was their country. And they had to leave that country to be in exile in another country, which is not really fair when you think about it.
But they didn't like this country, the resources and the freedom that they had. Was it not better?
It was better for them at the time. But you have to remember that South Africa is a very wealthy country. They have gold mines and diamond mines, and it's a lot of timber.
The wealth is there and the resources are there,
but it wasn't controlled by black people.
Is it now controlled by black people?
Yes, by some. But they did not. One of the things that did not happen in South Africa that happened in some other countries, Nelson Mandela, when he became president, did not tell white people they could not stay in the country.
Should he have told them they could not stay?
No. What he did was he said, if you want to become a part of this government, you have to abide by the rules that we're going to set up together.
And so as a result of it today, the whites aren't they very active in the government?
Yes, white and black. Yes.
But the resources and the money is still controlled by the white, isn't it?
No. No, it's not. The government controls a lot of things in the country. They have a form of democracy, but not the same as we have. Totally and exactly, but it is a free country. In fact, right now, there's a lot of black millionaires since apartheid is over. Many black millionaires have made a lot of money in that country. They've done it in telecommunication, they've done it by buying.
Many black millionaires who are Africans, who are of the lower Africana.
That used to be in the outside. Many of them
They rose themselves to be millionaires when they were just peasants?
Most of them were living in exile in the United States.
And they went back and became millionaires.
In England, in France, in Germany. They were living in other countries where they were able to
have resources in order to make the investments to get the money.
And you have to remember that the money end of it, the rand, which is their money, based upon the American dollar at one time was 13-1. So if you went there with American money,
if you went there with an American dollar, you'd get 13 of their dollars.
That's right. And you could purchase a lot of things. When the lady
but you couldn't bring them back into this country. If you took $1 and they gave you 13 South African dollars for your $1.
But that was to be able to buy things in that country.
But you couldn't bring it back into the United States.
Well, you'd have to convert the money back to America. Well, yeah, you could.
I mean, the items that when you tried to bring those items back, the gold that you bought over there, back, then you would have the tax for the United States.
Yes,
you would.
It. Yes.
So would that be an advantage?
No. They became wealthy in their own country, which is what they want to do, because you have to remember that the Afrikaan was living very wealthy. They had beautiful homes, swimming pools, servants' quarters, and everything. And the African only could work in those homes, and they were living in shacks and shanties or whatever. They were relegated to the men working in the mines, and the mines were mostly black miners, and they had to live in these homes that they built separate from their family. And they had to go home maybe once a month to their family, which was very bad and hard on the women and the children because the husbands were away. So a very famous dance evolved from that called the boot dance. They had to find ways to entertain themselves.
Well, that sounds like slavery, what slaves did.
That's exactly what apartheid was.
They found a way to entertain themselves.
Yes.
And they started dancing, and that was a form of recreation form of exercise.
But I would like to get to why would make me write this story.
Okay. Can I tell the audience who we're talking to?
Yes.
Audience, we'll continue to talk to Nettie Thomas Lark. She's an author, she's an educator, and she's going to let us know why she wrote the book. It's a long story and a long history behind it. And we find out about the story and about the young girl that she writes about.
Young boy, yes.
The young boy? Mm-hmm. Okay. That she writes about. It all makes sense. It comes together.
Well, first I want to tell you that I actually did writing when I worked for the New York City Board of Education as Director of Staff Development. My job was to create some curriculum for African American heritage. So I did a lot of work with blacks in the Old West, which people don't know much about, and the black cowboys and the Buffalo Soldiers. I did slavery in New York, and because people thought there was no slavery in New York, but there was a lot of slavery. Next to Charleston, South Carolina, they had the most slaves in the 1700s. They weren't farming on a plantation, but they were doing all kinds of other work, loading ships to docks or whatever they were doing.
It was a different kind of work for slaves,
yes.
Because it was involuntary servitude.
Exactly, and they weren't paid for it. Some people were paid a little bit, but most of them were never paid anything.
But there was slavery in New York because these people were captured.
Yes.
Now, when slavery ended, 1865, 1867, there are a number of blacks in the South greatly outnumbered the whites.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And many of them migrated to the North, so when they came, were there slaves up there again, all over again?
Well, slavery ended in New York before it ended in Charleston or in the South. But
was that before 1865?
Yes, yes. But what happened was, on, say, Long Island, for an example, they had a group, people called the Blackbirders. They used to sail their ships up and down the Long Island Sound, and Long Island has a long history of slavery. They raised potatoes and all kinds of things, and
they still raise it.
They used slaves for the
harvest.
Yeah, and so that if a slave catcher, which they call the Blackbirders, would catch somebody and take them on their ship and take them back to the South, they got paid a lot of money for that. You know, it's like a slave catcher.
Well, that's interesting, because there were people, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, they had people who were escaping slavery to come to the North. So why would they escape to come to the North?
It was over by that time, though. It was over by the time Harriet Tubman did the Underground Railroad. Slavery had ended in New York,
but had not ended in the South.
Right.
So she was bringing these people from the South to the North to a different kind of slavery.
Well, they weren't slaves in New York. The slave had ended in New York and Massachusetts and New Jersey.
But it ended before the Emancipation Proclamation then?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
It had ended far before that.
Before Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation?
Okay. Yes. So when they would go to New York and to Canada, they were free. So one of my jobs as Director of Staff Development was to help, I had teachers to help me to write curriculum for the teachers and to create it on the elementary, the lowest level.
Where would they get the information from?
We did research.
Okay.
We did research.
And you incorporated it in the regular textbooks, or did you do a separate book?
A separate book, and I did separate activities for students that were in kindergarten,
but this
first grade.
This is for black children, white children, every child.
Yeah, up through grade 8. That's where we stopped.
Audience, we're continuing to talk with Nettie Lark as we talk about her writing, and we're going to get to her book. So we're going to pause for a moment and take a short break. Don't go away. And then she's going to share with you the book and the book that she wrote. And so you have a book signing today. she wrote the book, she realized that the availability of books for young children was not present, especially African American children. They didn't see people that looked like themselves in books. They saw people of a different pigmentation, people with a different language, that they had to read about people that they couldn't even identify with. And so that was one of the reasons that she wrote her book. Have you ever heard of teachers using experience stories and letting the children write the books?
Yes.
Is that the same thing?
As mine?
Uh-huh.
No, but I know that when I taught, I did let my students write some of their own stories.
And did they?
They did not publish them, but they wrote them.
And could they read what they wrote? Sometimes.
Sometimes, but by the end of the school year, they all read in my class.
Every child.
That's right.
Could read.
It might have been different levels, but they were higher than they were before they came into the class.
You had a secret for that.
Yes. Hard work, patience, perseverance, and you have to love children.
And you have to work
Take
with
them where they are.
Did you work with the families?
Yes.
Okay.
I used to make home visits, which the kids were surprised I would do, in New York City.
Did you run into anything that was unusual when you made your home visits?
No. I was never, I think when people can sense when you are afraid of something, you know, but my advice was, you know, these are people. We all get dressed the same way, you know. They are just, I happen to have a degree or two, and maybe they don't. But what is that? That means nothing. They're people, you know. And you have to love children if you're going to teach them and let them learn. Because I think kids can sense when you're not genuine. They can sense that.
Now, when you wrote your book, you talked about the baby in this book.
Mm-hmm.
So is this book written for young children or is it written for older children?
You can read this book to children as young as 3, because I read it to my own grandchild, who was the baby that was born in this story. He's 3 and a half.
Did he understand?
I explained it to him because I was reading it. But older kids, up to about 8 or 9, could read this book and really, really understand it. And one of the things I did in this book, because it does have an African connection, the grandmother in this story is the same lady who was tortured, who was jailed, who was on Oprah Winfrey, who came here when her daughter was 9 and her son was 11, who went back to South Africa and helped to elect Nelson Mandela. This is the grandmother in this story.
Is she one of the millionaires that you talked about?
Yes, she is. She did. She was very frugal. She saved her money. She went back, and when she died, and we buried her 2 weeks ago.
Now, when she went back and became a millionaire, did she reach back and help some people along the way that needed help?
Yes. She was a very kind and generous person. That I can attest to. And she is the hero or the heroine of this story. And this is why I want you to know about her, because when she died 2 weeks...
She inspired you to write this story.
In a sense, she did, yes. And so did her daughter.
Now, they spoke a different kind of language, Swahili.
No, she spoke Xhosa, and the daughter-in-law speaks very fluent English. In fact, she works for a famous black magazine right now.
The daughter-in-law does?
Yes, she is...
In New York?
Yes.
And Chicago?
New York. She's an online editor for arts and entertainment for this particular company.
Is this how the mother-in-law became so wealthy when she went back over there?
Well, she worked over here.
She had to have some connections over there while she was over here.
Oh, yes, always.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. Uh-huh. She invested when she went back, and her investments were very, very lucrative. But 2 weeks ago, she did pass. In the story, the grandmother in the story is called Gogo.
And why is that?
That's a term of endearment for a grandmother in the South African culture. So
rather than saying grandmother, they say Gogo.
Yeah.
Is Gogo in the Gongo, or whatever the language is that in the Gongo language?
The Gugu is in the Zulu language.
Is Zulu also a part of witchcraft.
No.
That's not what the Haitians.
Nothing at all to do with that. No, no. Well, anyway, she died 2 weeks ago. She was buried 2 weeks ago, and they had this large memorial. The African National Congress, Amnesty International, all of them came to her funeral.
In South Africa.
Yes, but when I wrote this book, she was alive.
So she knew that you had written about her.
Oh yes, she had the book.
Yes, so this was a monument to her.
Yeah.
This was an inspiration that you wrote about her.
Yeah.
And shared her information, and she could see herself in this book.
She was very pleased, and I met a local illustrator, and
while you were here in Charlotte.
Yeah, she's from Jersey, but she lives here now, and I self-published my own book. I got my own copyright. I did everything. I named my company Sweet Sassafras. I incorporated myself in New York, in North Carolina, and I found a person that could put the pictures in the book, and I gave her the pictures of each person that I wanted her to paint.
And you gave her the pictures, and she painted them.
Yes.
I want to thank you so much for being with us and for sharing your information. And audience, I want to thank you so much for being with us. And most of all, I want to thank Harvey Williams, who's been the director here today and been with us all afternoon. And thank this wonderful crew because they've made this program possible.